Marcus Sullivan had always believed that money could buy him anything. At 28 years old, he had inherited his father's construction empire and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar international corporation. With his perfectly tailored suits, expensive watches, and fleet of luxury cars, Marcus lived in a world where people said, "Yes, sir," and of course, Mr. Sullivan, to everything he demanded. On this particular Tuesday morning in London, Marcus was running late for a crucial business meeting at the prestigious Whitmore Financial Building. His black Bentley Continental GT roared through the busy streets as he barked orders into his phone at his assistant Sarah. "I don't care what excuse the mayor's office gave you," Marcus snapped, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "If they think they can delay our construction permits, they're dead wrong. Get me a meeting with someone who actually matters, not some paper-pushing nobody." Sarah's voice crackled through the car's premium sound system. "Sir, I've been trying, but the city planning department says there are legitimate concerns about the environmental impact study. They need more time to review. Time is money, Sarah, and my time is worth more than their entire annual budget," Marcus interrupted, his jaw clenching. "These people need to understand who they're dealing with. I've donated millions to this city. I practically own half the politicians in this town." As his Bentley approached the financial district, Marcus noticed the streets were more crowded than usual. Police barriers had been set up along several roads, and he could see tourists gathering with cameras and excited expressions. His driver, James, an elderly man who had worked for the Sullivan family for over 15 years, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Sullivan, it appears there's some sort of royal visit happening today. The roads are quite congested due to the security measures," James said politely. Marcus looked up from his phone, irritation flashing across his sharp features. "Royal visit? What is this, the Middle Ages? I don't care if the Queen of England herself is visiting. I have a meeting that could be worth $50 million, and I'm not going to be late because some overpaid ceremonial figures want to parade around town." James nodded respectfully but remained silent. He had learned over the years that when Marcus was in one of his moods, it was best to let him vent rather than try to reason with him. The traffic crawled forward at a snail's pace, and Marcus could feel his blood pressure rising with each passing minute. "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered, loosening his silk tie. "In America, we don't shut down entire city blocks just because some foreign dignitary wants to shake hands and smile for the cameras. This kind of medieval nonsense is exactly why Europe is falling behind economically." As they inched closer to the financial district, Marcus could see the elaborate security setup. Royal protection officers in dark suits spoke quietly into their earpieces, while ceremonial guards in their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats stood at attention at key positions. The sight of all this pageantry only fueled Marcus's growing frustration. "Look at this circus," he scoffed, gesturing toward the guards. "Grown men playing dress-up, standing around like statues while the real world grinds to a halt. Do you know how much money is being lost every minute because of this theatrical nonsense?" James tried to find an alternative route, but every street leading to their destination seemed to be either closed or severely restricted. Police officers directed traffic away from the secure areas, their expressions serious and professional. Marcus checked his Rolex Submariner and saw that he was already 20 minutes late for his meeting. "That's it," Marcus declared, his patience finally snapping. "James, pull over right here. I'm walking the rest of the way." "Sir, I'm not sure that's advisable," James said carefully. "The security perimeter seems quite extensive and—" "I didn't ask for your opinion," Marcus cut him off sharply. "I'm not some tourist who's going to be intimidated by a few guards in funny hats. I'm Marcus Sullivan, and I go where I need to go." Marcus stepped out of the Bentley onto the sidewalk, straightening his jacket and grabbing his leather briefcase. The London air was crisp, and he could hear the distant sounds of ceremonial music and crowds gathering. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against the pavement as he strode purposefully toward the financial building. As he approached the first security checkpoint, a polite police officer held up his hand. "I'm sorry, sir, but this area is restricted today due to the royal visit. You'll need to take the designated alternate route around the perimeter." Marcus pulled out his Platinum American Express card and his business card, holding them up like badges of authority. "Officer, I'm Marcus Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan International. I have an extremely important business meeting in that building," he said, pointing toward his destination. I'm sure we can work something out. The officer remained professional but firm. I understand, sir, but the security measures are in place for everyone's safety. The alternate route will add perhaps 10 minutes to your journey, but I assure you it's the only way through today. 10 minutes. To Marcus, 10 minutes represented thousands of dollars in lost opportunities. His face reddened as he realized this ordinary police officer, someone who probably made less in a year than Marcus spent on a single vacation, was telling him what he couldn't do. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. I employ over 10,000 people. I pay more in taxes than you'll see in a lifetime. I don't take detours, especially not for some antiquated ceremony that should have been abolished decades ago. The officer's expression remained neutral, though Marcus caught a slight tightening around his eyes. Sir, I understand your frustration, but the security protocols apply to everyone without exception. I'm happy to escort you to the alternate route, which will get you to your destination safely and efficiently. Marcus laughed bitterly. Escort me? Like I'm some common criminal? This is exactly what's wrong with this country. Too much reverence for outdated traditions and not enough respect for the people who actually drive the economy. Despite the officer's patient attempts to de-escalate the situation, Marcus became increasingly agitated. Other pedestrians began to notice the confrontation, some stopping to watch the well-dressed American businessman argue with the police officer. Marcus seemed to feed off the attention, his voice growing louder and more confrontational. In America, we understand that business comes first, Marcus declared to anyone within hearing distance. We don't shut down entire cities just so some ceremonial figurehead can wave at tourists. This is the 21st century, not some medieval fantasy. The police officer maintained his professionalism admirably, but Marcus could see he was running out of patience. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to please follow the designated route. If you continue to refuse to comply with the security measures, I'll have no choice but to... But to what? Marcus interrupted. Arrest a tax-paying businessman for trying to get to work? Do you realize the international incident that would cause? My company has contracts with governments around the world. One phone call from me could... Is there a problem here, Officer Reynolds? The new voice was calm, measured, and carried an unmistakable tone of authority. Marcus turned to see a tall man in an impeccably maintained military uniform approaching them. Unlike the police officer's modern gear, this man wore the traditional ceremonial dress of the Queen's Guard, a red tunic with gold braiding, dark blue trousers with a red stripe, and a tall bearskin hat that added to his already impressive height. Marcus's first thought was that this guard looked like he had stepped out of a tourist postcard. The uniform seemed almost comically old-fashioned to his modern American sensibilities. Here was the perfect target for his frustration, a grown man playing soldier in a costume that belonged in a museum. Just what I needed, Marcus muttered under his breath, loud enough for both men to hear. Another actor in a costume. The guard's eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was somewhat unsettling. Unlike the police officer, who had maintained a customer service demeanor throughout the confrontation, this man's presence commanded immediate attention. He stood with perfect military bearing, his hands clasped behind his back, waiting for an explanation. Officer Reynolds quickly briefed the guard on the situation. Sir, this gentleman is refusing to use the designated alternate route. He insists on proceeding through the restricted area. The guard nodded slowly, then turned his full attention to Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was crisp, clear, and unmistakably upper-class British. Sir, I understand you have business to attend to, but I'm afraid the security perimeter is non-negotiable today. For your own safety and the safety of others, I must insist that you follow Officer Reynolds' directions. Marcus felt his temper flare again. Here was another obstacle, another person telling him what he couldn't do. But this time, it was someone dressed up like a toy soldier, probably some unemployed actor hired to stand around and look decorative for the tourists. Let me guess, Marcus said with undisguised sarcasm. You're going to tell me about tradition and duty and all that romantic nonsense. Well, here's a reality check. I live in the real world, where time is money and results matter more than ceremonies. The guard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Indeed, sir. The real world. Perhaps you could enlighten me about this real world of yours. Marcus sensed an opening and seized it. This guard, with his fancy uniform and ceremonial sword, probably had no idea what it meant to build something from nothing, to compete in global markets, to make decisions worth millions of dollars. "I'll tell you about the real world," Marcus began, his confidence growing. "In the real world, we don't waste time with medieval pageantry. We don't shut down entire city districts so people can wave flags and pretend we're still living in the age of kings and queens. In the real world, we understand that business drives civilization forward, not backward-looking ceremonies." The guard listened without interrupting, his military bearing unchanged. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of an American businessman lecturing a Queen's Guard in the middle of a London street. "I've built a company worth billions of dollars," Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "I employ thousands of people. I create real value. I contribute to society in measurable ways. And you? You stand around in a costume, pretending to guard people who contribute nothing but photo opportunities." Marcus gestured dismissively at the guard's uniform. "Look at yourself. You're a grown man playing dress-up, living off taxpayer money to maintain a fantasy that died out centuries ago. While people like me are building the future, you're preserving a useless past." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Marcus could see phones being pulled out to record the confrontation. Good, he thought. Let the world see how these pompous ceremonial guards react when confronted with reality. "You want to know what's really happening here today?" Marcus asked rhetorically, his voice carrying to the growing audience. "Millions of dollars in lost productivity, thousands of people inconvenienced, an entire city disrupted. Also, some unelected figurehead can maintain the illusion of relevance." The guard remained silent, but Marcus noticed that several other uniformed personnel had quietly moved closer. Some were police officers, but others wore various military dress uniforms. Rather than backing down, Marcus felt emboldened by the larger audience. "This is exactly what's wrong with Europe," he declared. "Too much reverence for the past, not enough vision for the future. While countries like America forge ahead with innovation and enterprise, you're stuck worshipping relics and pretending that hereditary privilege means something in the modern world." Marcus pulled out his phone and checked the time ostentatiously. "I've now wasted 25 minutes of my valuable time because of this theatrical nonsense. Do you have any idea what 25 minutes of my time is worth?" "More than you probably make in a month standing around in that ridiculous outfit." The guard finally spoke, his voice still calm and measured. "I'm curious, Mr. Sullivan. Marcus Sullivan. Look it up. Mr. Sullivan. I'm curious about your perspective on service." Marcus laughed. "Service? You call this service? Standing around like a decoration while real people try to conduct real business? If you want to serve your country, get a job that actually contributes something. Build something. Create something. Stop living off nostalgia and tradition." "I see," the guard replied quietly. "And you believe that your contribution, your business activities, represent a higher form of service than what you see before you?" "I don't believe it," Marcus shot back. "I know it. Facts don't care about your traditions. Numbers don't lie. While you're playing soldier, I'm creating jobs, generating wealth, and advancing civilization. Your whole existence is subsidized by people like me who actually produce value." The guard nodded thoughtfully. "A fascinating perspective. Tell me, Mr. Jan. Sullivan, what do you know about real service? About sacrifice? About duty to something greater than oneself?" Marcus scoffed. "Spare me the philosophical lecture. I've heard it all before from people who've never had to make a payroll or compete in global markets. The greatest service I can provide is creating opportunities for others through entrepreneurship and free enterprise." "Indeed," the guard said softly. "And I'm sure your employees and shareholders appreciate your dedication to their welfare." The sarcasm was subtle, but unmistakable, and it hit Marcus like a slap. "Don't patronize me," he snapped. "At least I'm honest about what I do. I don't hide behind ceremonies and costumes. I don't pretend that my job has some mystical significance beyond its practical value." Marcus gestured broadly at the security setup around them. "All of this, the pageantry, the guards, the disruption, it's just an expensive way to make ordinary people feel small and powerless. Well, I'm not ordinary people. I don't bow down to hereditary privilege or ceremonial authority. The guard's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught something in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but perhaps disappointment. It only fueled Marcus's determination to prove his point. You know what your problem is? Marcus continued. You've never had to prove your worth in the real world. You've never had to compete, to earn respect through achievement rather than costume and ceremony. Everything you are depends on maintaining an illusion that stopped being relevant decades ago. Marcus looked around at the crowd that had gathered. These people watching us, they work real jobs, pay real taxes, face real challenges, and their tax money pays for you to stand around in fancy dress guarding people who've never done an honest day's work in their lives. The guard listened to this tirade without visible reaction, which only seemed to frustrate Marcus further. He was used to getting responses, anger, defensiveness, submission, but this man's calm professionalism was unnerving. Don't you have anything to say? Marcus demanded. No defense of your precious traditions? No appeal to honor and duty and all that romantic nonsense? No, Mr. Tads. Sullivan, the guard replied quietly. I think you've made your position quite clear. Marcus felt a moment of triumph. Finally, he had encountered someone who recognized superior logic when they heard it. Good. Then maybe we can drop this charade and you can let me get to my meeting. I've already lost enough money today thanks to this circus. But instead of stepping aside, the guard remained exactly where he was. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. Marcus's face reddened. Why not? I've explained the situation clearly. I'm a businessman trying to conduct legitimate business. You're a ceremonial guard with no real authority. This isn't complicated. You're correct that it isn't complicated, the guard agreed. The security perimeter is in place for valid reasons, and it applies to everyone without exception. Your business activities, however important they may be to you, don't supersede security protocols. Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Are you serious? After everything I just explained to you, you're still going to hide behind your little rules and regulations? I'm not hiding behind anything. Sullivan, I'm doing my job. Your job? Marcus laughed harshly. Your job is to stand around looking pretty for the tourists. Your job is ceremonial nonsense. You don't have real responsibilities like I do. The guard's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm tone. Perhaps, Mr. Sullivan, you should consider that you might not fully understand what my job entails. Marcus sensed weakness and pressed his advantage. Oh, I understand perfectly. You wear a fancy uniform. You follow orders. You maintain discipline and tradition. It's all very impressive to people who don't understand how the real world works. But I see through it. Marcus stepped closer to the guard, his voice dropping to what he thought was a confidential tone. Look, I understand you have to put on a show for the crowd, but between us, man to man, we both know this is all theater. You know I'm right about everything I've said. You know this whole setup is outdated and inefficient. So here's what I'm proposing, Marcus continued, pulling out his wallet. You let me through quietly, and I'll make sure your superiors hear about your reasonable and practical approach to problem solving. I can make a very generous donation to whatever police charity or military fund you prefer. Everyone wins. The guard's eyes fixed on the wallet, with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Are you attempting to bribe me, Mr. Sullivan? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Something in the guard's tone had changed subtly, becoming sharper and more dangerous. Not a bribe, he said quickly. A donation, a gesture of appreciation for public service. Completely legitimate and above board. I see, the guard said softly. And you believe that your money gives you the right to ignore security protocols that apply to everyone else? I believe that practical solutions are better than rigid adherence to rules that don't make sense in specific circumstances, Marcus replied, trying to regain his confident tone. This isn't about money buying privileges. It's about intelligent people finding reasonable compromises. The guard nodded slowly. A reasonable compromise. Yes, I think perhaps it's time for a reasonable compromise, Mr. Sullivan. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Finally, this man was seeing sense. Excellent. I knew you were more intelligent than your job required. So... The compromise, the guard interrupted quietly, is this. You will follow Officer Reynolds to the alternate route, or you will be escorted from this area. And the garden professor and a sister. And a sister. Those are your options. Marcus stared at the guard in disbelief. After everything I've explained to you? After I've offered to make a generous contribution? You're still going to act like some petty bureaucrat with a uniform fetish? I'm going to do my job, Mr. Sullivan. The same job I've been doing long before you arrived, and will continue doing long after you leave. Marcus felt his control finally snap completely. You know what your problem is? You're nobody. You're a nobody in a costume, pretending to have authority you've never earned. I've built something. I've achieved something. I matter in the world. And you? You're just decoration. The guard's expression finally changed, not to anger as Marcus had expected, but to something that looked almost like pity. Mr. Sullivan, I think this conversation has gone on quite long enough, but Marcus was beyond stopping now. All his frustration, all his sense of superiority, all his contempt for what he saw as useless tradition, came pouring out in a torrent of words. You represent everything that's wrong with this country, with this whole continent. Pointless tradition, meaningless ceremony, people living off past glories instead of building future success. While people like me create jobs and wealth and progress, people like you drain resources and contribute nothing. Marcus gestured wildly at the elaborate security setup. Look at all this waste, all this expense, all this disruption. And for what? So some unelected hereditary figurehead can wave at crowds and pretend to be relevant. It's medieval, it's absurd. It's everything that's holding humanity back from reaching its full potential. The crowd around them had grown substantially, and Marcus could see people recording with their phones. Good. Let the world see this confrontation between the future and the past, between achievement and inherited privilege, between reality and fantasy. You want to know what I think of your precious royal family? Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly across the street. I think they're the last vestige of a feudal system that should have been abolished centuries ago. I think they represent inequality, unearned privilege, and the worship of bloodlines over merit. The guard's face had gone very still, but Marcus was too caught up in his own rhetoric to notice. In America, we judge people by what they accomplish, not by who their ancestors were. We believe in earning respect through achievement, not inheriting it through genetic lottery. Your whole system is a joke that the rest of the world has moved beyond. Marcus pointed directly at the guard. And you're the perfect symbol of that joke. A grown man playing dress-up, living in the past, propped up by taxpayer money to maintain an illusion that died out with the horse and buggy. You're obsolete. Your job is obsolete. Your entire reason for existing is obsolete. The guard said nothing, but Marcus noticed that several more uniformed personnel had quietly surrounded the immediate area. Rather than intimidating him, their presence seemed to validate his point about wasteful ceremonial excess. Look around you, Marcus said, addressing the crowd as much as the guard. Count the number of people in fancy uniforms doing nothing productive. Calculate the cost of all this security, all this disruption, all this pageantry. Think about what that money could do if it were invested in education, infrastructure, or business development, instead of maintaining a medieval fantasy. Marcus turned back to the guard, his voice dripping with contempt. You're a living museum piece, and you don't even realize it. While the real world moves forward, you're stuck playing a role that stopped being relevant before your grandparents were born. The guard finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly. Are you quite finished, Mr. Sullivan? I'm finished when you stop wasting my time with this nonsense and let me get to my meeting. Marcus shot back. The guard nodded slowly. Very well, then. I believe it's time you learned exactly who you've been speaking to. Something in his tone made Marcus pause. There was a new quality to the guard's voice. Not anger, not defensiveness, but something far more dangerous. Authority. Real authority, not the ceremonial kind Marcus had been dismissing. Officer Reynolds, the guard said without taking his eyes off Marcus. Would you please contact Inspector Morrison and inform him that we have a situation requiring immediate attention? Marcus felt the first stirring of unease, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. What kind of situation? A businessman trying to get to a meeting? Are you seriously going to escalate this over a simple scheduling conflict? Mr. Sullivan, the guard said with deadly quiet. "You've spent the last 30 minutes demonstrating a complete lack of respect for security protocols, attempting to bribe a member of His Majesty's forces, and publicly insulting the Crown. I think it's time you understood the consequences of your actions." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced even to his own ears. "Consequences? For expressing my opinion? For pointing out inefficiencies in government spending? This is still a free country, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," the guard agreed. "A free country with laws, protocols, and institutions that deserve respect regardless of your personal opinions about their value." Marcus felt the crowd's attention intensifying, and his businessman's instincts told him the mood was shifting. What had started as his triumphant demonstration of superior logic was beginning to feel like something else entirely. But he had come too far to back down now. His reputation, his self-image, everything he believed about himself and his place in the world depended on proving that his way of thinking was superior to this antiquated nonsense. "You know what I think?" Marcus said, making one final play for dominance in the situation. "I think you're scared. Scared that people like me are showing the world how irrelevant you really are. Scared that your precious traditions can't stand up to logical scrutiny. Scared that your whole way of life is becoming extinct." The guard looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus caught something in his expression that made his stomach tighten with sudden apprehension. "Mr. Sullivan," the guard said with perfect calm, "I think it's time you learned exactly how wrong you are about everything." Inspector Morrison arrived within minutes, accompanied by 2 additional officers and what appeared to be a senior military official in an elaborate dress uniform adorned with numerous medals and insignia. Marcus watched their approach with growing unease, but his pride still wouldn't allow him to admit that perhaps he had misjudged the situation. "Inspector," the guard said crisply as Morrison approached, "this gentleman has been refusing to comply with security protocols for the past 30 minutes. He has also made certain statements that I believe warrant your attention." Inspector Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s whose expression suggested he had seen every possible variation of human stupidity during his career with the Metropolitan Police. He looked from Marcus to the guard and back again, his experienced eyes taking in the details of the situation. "I see," Morrison said carefully. "And what exactly has this gentleman said that concerns you?" Marcus felt compelled to speak before the guard could respond. "Inspector, I'm Marcus Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan International. I've been trying to explain to your people that I have an extremely important business meeting that cannot be delayed. I've been more than reasonable, but they seem to think that ceremonial protocols are more important than legitimate business activities." Morrison nodded slowly. "Mr. Sullivan, is it? And you're an American citizen?"
"That's correct."
"And I should mention that my company has extensive business relationships throughout Europe, including several major contracts with UK government agencies. I'm not some random tourist causing trouble. I'm a legitimate businessman being subjected to unnecessary delays." "I understand," Morrison said diplomatically. "However, I'm told you've made some rather strong statements about our security arrangements today. Perhaps you could elaborate on those comments." Marcus sensed an opportunity to state his case to someone with real authority. "Inspector, I've simply pointed out the obvious inefficiencies in shutting down half of London for what amounts to a photo opportunity. I understand that certain people find these ceremonies emotionally meaningful, but from a practical standpoint, the cost-benefit analysis is clearly negative." The senior military official stepped forward. Unlike the others, his bearing suggested someone accustomed to command, and the medals on his chest indicated significant service. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Colonel Hartwell. I'm curious about your assessment of our security arrangements. You seem to have strong opinions about their necessity." "Colonel, with all respect to your service, yes, I do have strong opinions. In America, we've learned to balance security needs with economic efficiency. We don't shut down entire metropolitan areas unless there's a genuine threat. What I see here today is massive overkill driven more by tradition than by any realistic security assessment." Colonel Hartwell's expression remained neutral. "I see. And your expertise in security matters comes from—" Marcus felt a flicker of annoyance at the question. "My expertise comes from running a global corporation that operates in dozens of countries, many of which have far more serious security challenges than anything Britain faces. I've worked with security professionals around the world, and I can assure you that this level of disruption is completely unnecessary. Fascinating, the colonel replied. And I suppose your global experience has given you insights into the specific threats faced by members of the royal family today? I understand that certain precautions are necessary, Marcus conceded, but what I see here goes far beyond reasonable precautions. This is security theater, designed more to impress the public than to address actual risks. The guard who had been Marcus's primary antagonist stepped closer to the group. Colonel, perhaps Mr. Sullivan would be interested to know exactly who he's been lecturing for the past half hour. Marcus felt his confidence waver slightly. There was something in the man's tone that suggested he was missing an important piece of information. I've been speaking to a ceremonial guard who seems to take his costume a bit too seriously, Marcus said, trying to maintain his dismissive tone.
Colonel Hartwell and Inspector Morrison exchanged a glance that Marcus couldn't quite interpret.
Sullivan, the colonel said slowly, allow me to introduce Captain James Worthington, Welsh Guards, recently returned from his third tour of duty in Afghanistan, where he served with distinction in some of the most dangerous regions of that country. Marcus felt the first real crack in his certainty. Afghanistan? But he's a ceremonial guard. I thought Captain Worthington, Colonel Hartwell continued, is a decorated combat veteran who has served his country in both ceremonial and operational capacities for over 12 years. He holds the Military Cross for Valor under fire, among other commendations. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at the guard, Captain Worthington, with new eyes, suddenly seeing past the ceremonial uniform to the man beneath. The bearing he had dismissed as theatrical posturing now revealed itself as genuine military discipline, earned through real combat experience. I didn't realize, Marcus began, but Captain Worthington raised a hand to stop him. Mr. Saraceno. Sullivan, you made it quite clear that you weren't interested in understanding what you were looking at. You saw the uniform and made your assumptions accordingly. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process this new information. But you're on ceremonial duty today. You're part of the pageantry I was criticizing. Yes, Captain Worthington agreed. Today I'm on ceremonial duty. Last month I was in the Hindu Kush Mountains, working with local forces to disrupt Taliban supply lines. Next month I'll be training new recruits who will deploy to various trouble spots around the world. The uniform changes, but the service continues. Inspector Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Sullivan, Captain Worthington has spent the last 30 minutes listening to you explain how his life's work is meaningless, how his service to his country is obsolete theater, and how his very existence is a waste of taxpayer money. I'm curious how you feel about those statements now. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. Everything he had said, every assumption he had made, every insult he had delivered, all of it had been directed at a man who had genuinely risked his life in service to his country, a man who had earned his position through sacrifice and valor rather than inheriting it through privilege. Captain, I apologize, Marcus said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. If I had known about your service record, I would never have what, Mr. Sullivan? Captain Worthington's voice was quiet but intense. Would never have expressed your actual opinions about military service? Would never have revealed your true feelings about sacrifice and duty? Or would you simply have been more careful about who you shared those opinions with? Marcus struggled to find the right words. I was frustrated about the delays and I spoke without thinking. I didn't mean to insult your personal service. But you did mean to insult what you thought I represented, the captain replied. You made it quite clear that you believe ceremonial duties are meaningless, that military tradition is obsolete, and that anyone who participates in such activities is living off taxpayer money without contributing real value. I was talking about the system, not about individual soldiers, Marcus protested weakly. The system, Captain Worthington repeated. The system that allowed me to serve alongside American forces in Afghanistan. The system that maintains alliances and partnerships that protect both our countries. The system that preserves the institutions and values that make our way of life possible. Colonel Hartwell stepped forward. Sullivan, you mentioned that you work with government agencies here in the UK. I'm curious which agencies those might be. Marcus hesitated, suddenly aware that his business relationships might be at risk. Various departments. Defense procurement, international trade, that sort of thing. Defense procurement, the colonel mused. So you've profited from contracts with the very military establishment you've been criticizing today. The irony was devastating. Marcus had built a significant portion of his wealth through government contracts, including military contracts, while simultaneously holding the men and women who served in contempt. His business success was directly tied to the institutions he had been attacking. It's not hypocritical, Marcus said defensively. Business is business. I provide goods and services that the military needs, regardless of my personal opinions about efficiency and tradition. I see, Inspector Morrison said dryly. So you're quite willing to accept money from institutions you consider obsolete and wasteful. Marcus felt trapped by his own logic. Every attempt to justify his position only seemed to reveal new contradictions and moral inconsistencies. The crowd around them had grown larger, and he could see phones recording every word of this humiliating reversal. Gentlemen, Marcus said, trying to regain some semblance of dignity, I think we've all made our points. I clearly misjudged the situation, and I've apologized for any offense. Perhaps we could move forward constructively. Move forward, Captain Worthington repeated thoughtfully. Yes, let's talk about moving forward. Mr. Sullivan, you've spent considerable time explaining your philosophy of business and achievement. You've made it clear that you measure worth by financial success and practical contribution. Marcus nodded cautiously, unsure where this was leading. Tell me, the captain continued, what do you know about the young man who died last month in Helmand Province? Lance Corporal Tommy Harrison, age 22, from Birmingham. He was providing security for a convoy delivering medical supplies to a remote village when his vehicle hit an improvised explosive device. The question caught Marcus completely off guard. I don't know anything about that specific incident. Lance Corporal Harrison left behind a wife and a 2-year-old daughter. Captain Worthington continued, his voice steady but carrying undertones of deep emotion. By your metrics, his life was a complete waste. He earned less in a year than you probably spend on lunch. He contributed nothing to economic growth. He produced no measurable value in your business sense. Marcus felt increasingly uncomfortable. Captain, I never said that individual soldiers don't matter. I was criticizing institutional inefficiency, not personal sacrifice. Were you? The captain's eyes were intense, because I distinctly remember you explaining that people like me drain resources and contribute nothing, that our existence is obsolete, that we're living museum pieces maintained by taxpayer money. I was talking about ceremonial roles, Marcus insisted. I wasn't thinking about active duty soldiers or combat veterans, but we're the same people, Mr. Sullivan. The guards you see today in ceremonial dress are the same men and women who deploy to combat zones, who train new soldiers, who maintain the readiness of our armed forces. You can't separate the ceremonial from the operational because they're performed by the same people. Colonel Hartwell nodded gravely. Mr. Crabbe! Sullivan, perhaps you're unaware that many of the guards on duty today have recently returned from operational deployments. They've earned the right to represent their country in both capacities. Marcus felt his carefully constructed worldview crumbling around him. But the ceremonies, the pageantry, surely you can't argue that it's an efficient use of resources. Efficient? Captain Worthington's voice carried a note of steel. Let me tell you about efficiency, Mr. Sullivan. When I was in Afghanistan, working with local tribal leaders who had never heard of democracy or constitutional monarchy, do you know what they understood immediately? Honor, tradition, respect for symbols and ceremonies that represent larger values. The captain paused, letting his words sink in. Those tribal leaders couldn't read balance sheets or understand quarterly profit reports, but they could recognize the significance of uniform, ceremony, and military tradition. That recognition opened doors that no amount of business efficiency could have opened. Inspector Morrison added, Mr. Sullivan, the ceremonial aspects of our institutions aren't separate from their practical functions. They're integral to how our society maintains continuity, inspires loyalty, and projects stability both domestically and internationally. Marcus struggled to process these concepts. His entire business philosophy was built on measurable outcomes and quantifiable results. The idea that intangible values like honor and tradition could have practical importance was difficult for him to accept. But surely, Marcus said, grasping for familiar ground, you must acknowledge that there's waste in the system. All this security, all these people, all this expense for what amounts to a public relations exercise. Public relations, Captain Worthington repeated slowly. Is that what you think this is? Something in his tone made Marcus realize he had stepped into even deeper water. Well, yes, the royal family, the ceremonies. It's all about maintaining a positive image, isn't it? Marketing for British culture and tourism. Colonel Hartwell's expression grew grave. Sullivan, today's ceremony isn't a tourism event or a public relations exercise. Today we're commemorating the centenary of the Battle of Passchendaele, where over 325,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers were killed or wounded in a campaign that lasted just over 3 months. The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. I didn't know. The hereditary figurehead you've been disparaging, Inspector Morrison continued, is here to honor the memory of those soldiers and to meet with surviving veterans and families of the fallen. Many of the men being honored today never made it to their 20th birthday. Marcus felt physically ill. Everything he had said, every criticism he had made, every insult he had delivered, all of it had been in the context of a memorial service for fallen soldiers. His business meeting, his impatience, his contempt for tradition, all of it suddenly seemed not just wrong, but obscenely inappropriate. The security you've been complaining about, Captain Worthington added quietly, isn't just protocol. Some of the veterans attending today are in their 90s. This may be their last opportunity to participate in such a ceremony. We take their safety very seriously. Marcus looked around at the crowd that had gathered, seeing it with completely new eyes. What he had dismissed as gawking tourists now revealed itself as something far more meaningful. Families holding photographs of relatives who had died in service. Elderly men in wheelchairs wearing medals and regimental ties. Young soldiers standing at attention not for show, but out of genuine respect for those who had gone before them. I didn't know, Marcus repeated, his voice barely audible. No one told me what the ceremony was for. Would it have mattered? Captain Worthington asked pointedly. Would knowing that this was a memorial service have changed your fundamental attitude toward military tradition and royal ceremony, or would you have simply found different grounds for criticism? The question forced Marcus to confront an uncomfortable truth about himself. Would he have been more respectful if he had known? Or would he have found ways to rationalize his position, to maintain his sense of superiority even in the face of such solemnity? I think, Marcus said slowly, that I've been very foolish today. Foolish how? Inspector Morrison prompted. About the specific ceremony? Or about something more fundamental? Marcus looked at Captain Worthington, really seeing him for the first time. The man who had maintained perfect composure while being insulted and belittled for 30 minutes. The veteran who had served his country in combat and was now serving it in a different but equally important capacity. The professional who had turned what could have been a simple security incident into a profound teaching moment. I think, Marcus said carefully, that I've been foolish about a lot of things. I built my entire worldview around the idea that measurable achievement is the only thing that matters. That tradition and ceremony are wastes of resources. That people like you are somehow less valuable than people like me. Captain Worthington nodded slowly. And now? Marcus struggled to find words adequate to express his shifting understanding. Now I'm beginning to realize that I might not understand value as well as I thought I did. That there might be types of service and sacrifice that don't show up on balance sheets but matter more than anything that does. That's a significant realization, Colonel Hartwell observed. What do you plan to do with it? The question hung in the air as Marcus grappled with its implications. How do you change a fundamental worldview that has guided your entire adult life? How do you reconcile decades of thinking one way with the sudden understanding that you might have been completely wrong?
I don't know, Marcus admitted.
I honestly don't know where to begin. Captain Worthington stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. Perhaps you could begin by understanding that different people serve in different ways, and that the value of that service isn't always measured in profit and loss statements. The men we're honoring today, Inspector Morrison added, didn't die for quarterly earnings or stock prices. They died for principles, democracy, freedom, the right of people to choose their own governments and live their own lives. Marcus felt the weight of that truth settling over him, and those principles are maintained by institutions you're part of. Exactly, Captain Worthington confirmed. The ceremonies you dismiss as pageantry are how we remember why those sacrifices were made. The traditions you consider obsolete are how we pass those values from one generation to the next. The costume you mocked represents a continuity of service that stretches back through centuries of men and women who believed something was more important than their individual comfort or success. Marcus looked around at the elaborate security arrangements with completely new eyes. This wasn't bureaucratic excess or wasteful pageantry. This was a society taking care to honor its heroes and preserve the memory of its defining moments. The expense wasn't waste. It was investment in the values that made their way of life possible. Captain, Marcus said quietly, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you gratitude for the patience you've shown and the lesson you've taught me.
The lesson isn't over, Mr. Call.
Sullivan, Captain Worthington replied. Understanding is just the beginning. The question is what you'll do with that understanding. Marcus felt the truth of that statement. Recognizing his error was only the first step. The harder question was how to live differently, how to incorporate this new understanding into his daily decisions and long-term priorities. What would you suggest? Marcus asked. Captain Worthington considered the question carefully. Start by recognizing that your success, your wealth, your opportunities, your freedom to build a business, all of it rests on foundations that other people have built and maintained through service and sacrifice. And then, Marcus prompted, then ask yourself how you can contribute to maintaining and strengthening those foundations rather than simply benefiting from them. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of the change in perspective he was facing. It's going to require rethinking everything, isn't it? Not everything, Inspector Morrison said with a slight smile. Your business skills, your drive, your ability to create jobs and opportunities, those are valuable contributions too. The question is whether you can see them as part of a larger mission rather than ends in themselves. Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying was beginning to lift from his shoulders. For years he had defined himself entirely by his business achievements, constantly measuring his worth against financial metrics and competitive success. The idea that he could be part of something larger than individual achievement was both liberating and terrifying. There's something else you should consider, Captain Worthington added. Your influence extends far beyond your own actions. The attitudes you express, the values you model, other people notice and are influenced by them. Marcus thought about his employees, his business partners, his family. How many people had he influenced with his dismissive attitude toward service and tradition? How many had adopted his purely transactional view of human worth? I think, Marcus said slowly, that I may have been setting a very poor example for a lot of people. Recognition is the first step toward change, Colonel Hartwell observed. The question is whether you have the courage to follow through with that change, even when it's difficult or costly. Marcus considered the implications of that challenge. Changing his fundamental worldview wouldn't just be a matter of private reflection. It would require acknowledging his errors publicly, potentially affecting his business relationships and personal reputation. It would mean redefining success in ways that might not align with the competitive culture he had created in his company. Captain, Marcus said, would you be willing to help me understand how to do this? But how to change course at this stage of my life? Captain Worthington studied him carefully. That would depend on whether you're truly committed to change or whether you're just looking for a way to feel better about yourself. The distinction was crucial, and Marcus knew it. Was he genuinely ready to embrace a different way of thinking about success and service? Or was he simply looking for a quick way to resolve the discomfort of his current situation? I think, Marcus said after a long pause, that I'm ready to find out. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar environment, the rehabilitation ward of a military hospital outside London. He wore simple civilian clothes rather than his usual expensive suits, and instead of barking orders into his phone, he was quietly listening to stories from wounded veterans. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After his encounter with Captain Worthington, Marcus had canceled his important meeting and spent the rest of that day attending the memorial ceremony. What he witnessed there had shaken him to his core. The dignity of elderly veterans, the grief of families still mourning losses from recent conflicts, the solemn precision of military honors that suddenly seemed anything but theatrical. "Mr. Sullivan," said Corporal Sarah Mitchell, a 24-year-old soldier who had lost her left leg to an improvised explosive device in Syria. "Captain Worthington mentioned you wanted to understand more about what service means. I'm curious what brought you here." Marcus had been asking himself that same question. "I think," he said carefully, "that I spent so many years focused on building my business that I forgot there were other ways to contribute to the world. I'm trying to learn what I missed." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She was working with a physical therapist, relearning basic movements that most people took for granted. "What kind of business do you run?" "Construction and development, primarily. We build commercial and residential projects around the world." As he said it, Marcus realized how differently he thought about his work now. Before, he would have launched into statistics about revenue and market share. Now, he found himself wondering about the human impact of what he built. "That sounds important," Sarah said. "People need homes and workplaces. You're building the infrastructure that makes other people's lives possible." Her perspective surprised him. "I never thought about it that way. I always focused on the profit margins and competitive advantages."
"Profit isn't wrong," Sarah replied, adjusting her prosthetic leg with practiced movements.
"But it's not the whole story, is it? The buildings you create outlast your involvement in them. They become part of communities, part of people's daily lives." Marcus watched her work through her rehabilitation exercises with quiet determination. 3 weeks ago, he would have seen her as a casualty, a cost of military operations that didn't provide clear economic benefits. Now he was beginning to understand that her sacrifice had protected something invaluable, the freedom and security that allowed people like him to build businesses in the first place. "Sarah," Marcus said hesitantly, "may I ask why you joined the military?" She paused in her exercises, considering the question. "My father was a career soldier. I grew up around military families, and I saw how they took care of each other. I wanted to be part of something like that, something bigger than myself." "And you don't regret it?" Even after, Marcus gestured toward her prosthetic. Sarah's expression grew serious. "The injury changed my life, obviously. But no, I don't regret my service. The mission we were on when this happened, we were providing security for medical teams treating local children. The work we did there saved lives and made a difference in a way that will last long after I'm gone." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced during his confrontation with Captain Worthington. Here was someone who had paid an enormous personal price for serving others, and she spoke about it without self-pity or resentment. "I'm starting to realize," Marcus said slowly, "that I've been measuring success all wrong." "How so?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "I thought success meant accumulating wealth, beating competitors, maximizing shareholder value. I thought the only things that mattered were things you could quantify and measure." Sarah nodded. "Those things aren't meaningless. Economic growth creates opportunities for people, but they're tools, aren't they? The question is what you use those tools to build." Marcus had been grappling with that exact question for weeks. His conversation with Captain Worthington had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his motivations and priorities. But understanding his errors was easier than figuring out how to correct them. "Sarah, if you don't mind me asking, how do you find purpose after something like this? How do you rebuild when your original plans are disrupted?" Sarah smiled, and Marcus noticed that despite everything she had endured, there was genuine warmth in her expression. "You focus on what you can still contribute instead of what you've lost. I can't serve in combat anymore, but I'm working with other wounded veterans now. I'm helping new amputees learn to use prosthetics. I'm sharing what I've learned about resilience and adaptation." Marcus thought about his own situation. He hadn't lost a limb or suffered physical trauma, but he was facing his own kind of reconstruction, rebuilding his entire understanding of what made life meaningful. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "service doesn't end when your original role changes. It just evolves. The skills and perspectives you develop in one context can be valuable in completely different situations. As if summoned by their conversation, Captain Worthington appeared in the doorway of the rehabilitation room. He was out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes, but his military bearing remained unmistakable. "Good afternoon, Corporal Mitchell. Mr. Sullivan." The captain's tone was friendly but professional. "How is the rehabilitation progressing?" "Getting stronger every day, sir," Sarah replied with obvious respect and affection. "Sullivan has been asking good questions about service and purpose." Captain Worthington looked at Marcus appraisingly. "And what conclusions are you reaching?" Marcus had been dreading this question, knowing that Captain Worthington would see through any superficial answers. "I'm realizing that I've spent most of my adult life building the wrong things. Or maybe building the right things for the wrong reasons." "Elaborate," the captain said, settling into a nearby chair. "I built my company to prove that I was successful, to accumulate wealth, to demonstrate superiority over competitors. I never really thought about whether what I was building served any larger purpose." Sarah interjected. "But Mr. Sullivan, the buildings your company creates do serve larger purposes, don't they? They provide homes for families, workspaces for businesses, infrastructure for communities." "Sarah's right," Captain Worthington agreed. "The question isn't whether your work has value, it's whether you recognize and embrace that value." Marcus felt frustrated by his inability to articulate what he was feeling. "I understand that intellectually, but I'm struggling with how to change my fundamental approach to business. How do I shift from seeing my company as a vehicle for personal success to seeing it as a means of service?" "Start with your employees," Captain Worthington suggested. "You mentioned that you employ 10,000 people. Each of those jobs represents a family that depends on you for their livelihood. Each of those positions is an opportunity for someone to build skills, contribute to meaningful projects, and support their loved ones." Marcus thought about his workforce and realized he had always viewed them primarily as costs to be managed rather than people whose lives he affected. "I think I've been a terrible employer," he admitted. "Why do you say that?" Sarah asked. "I've focused entirely on productivity and efficiency. I've treated people as interchangeable resources. I've never really considered their personal development or long-term well-being." Captain Worthington leaned forward. "Recognition is the first step. What's your next step?" Marcus had been thinking about that constantly since their first encounter. "I want to restructure my company around different principles. I want to create an organization that contributes to society rather than just extracting value from it." "That's ambitious," the captain observed. "How do you plan to implement such a fundamental change?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. That's why I'm here." "Woo! I'm trying to understand what service really means, how organizations can embody principles beyond profit maximization." Sarah spoke up. "Mr. Cortec Dobey. Sullivan, if I may make a suggestion, start by listening to your employees. Find out what they think about the company's mission and values. Ask them what would make their work more meaningful." Marcus realized he had never had such conversations with his workforce. He had always assumed that people worked primarily for money and that their personal fulfillment was irrelevant to business operations. "That's excellent advice," Captain Worthington agreed. "But you should also be prepared for difficult feedback. If you're genuinely committed to change, you need to hear hard truths about how your leadership has affected people." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. "You think people will be critical?" "I think people will be honest if you create an environment where honesty is safe and valued. The question is whether you're prepared to hear that honesty and act on it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another veteran, a man in his 30s using crutches. Captain Worthington introduced him as Sergeant Major David Rhodes, a career soldier who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several peacekeeping missions. "Sergeant Major," Captain Worthington said, "Mr. Sullivan is exploring questions about service and leadership. Perhaps you could share your perspective on what makes a good leader." Sergeant Major Rhodes settled into a chair, his expression thoughtful. "Leadership isn't about position or authority. It's about taking responsibility for other people's welfare and success." Marcus found himself leaning forward, eager to understand. What does that look like in practice? It means making decisions based on what's best for the team, even when it's not what's best for you personally. It means developing people's capabilities instead of just using them. It means being willing to sacrifice your own comfort for their success. Marcus thought about his own leadership style. I think I've done the opposite of all those things. How so? Sergeant Major Rhodes asked. I've made decisions based on what would maximize my personal wealth. I've used people's capabilities without investing in their development. I've prioritized my own comfort over their well-being. The admission was painful, but Marcus felt relief in finally acknowledging these truths out loud. Recognition is important, Sergeant Major Rhodes said, but it's just the starting point. The real test is whether you're willing to change your behavior even when it's costly or difficult.
Captain Worthington nodded.
Mr. Sullivan, transformation requires more than good intentions. It requires sustained commitment to different principles, especially when those principles conflict with short-term interests. Marcus understood the challenge. Changing his approach to business wouldn't just be a matter of adopting new policies. It would mean accepting lower profits, facing criticism from shareholders, and potentially sacrificing competitive advantages. Captain, Marcus said, I want to ask you something that might sound strange. Would you consider consulting for my company? The request surprised everyone in the room. Captain Worthington raised an eyebrow. In what capacity? I need someone who understands real leadership to help me restructure the organization. Someone who can teach me and my management team what it means to serve, rather than just command. Captain Worthington considered the request carefully. Mr. Sullivan, that would be a significant undertaking. Military leadership principles don't automatically translate to business contexts. But the fundamental principles do, don't they? Marcus pressed. Responsibility for others' welfare, service to a larger mission, sacrifice for the good of the team? Those principles are universal, Sergeant Major Rhodes agreed. The challenge is implementing them in an environment focused on competition and profit. Sarah looked thoughtful. Mr. Sullivan, if you're serious about this, you might start with smaller changes. Pilot programs that demonstrate new approaches to employee development and community engagement. Marcus felt energized by the possibility of concrete action. What kind of pilot programs? Education and training initiatives, Captain Worthington suggested. Programs that help employees develop skills that serve them beyond their current jobs. Community development projects that use your company's capabilities to address local needs. Veteran hiring and support programs, Sergeant Major Rhodes added. Many transitioning service members have leadership skills and technical expertise that would benefit your operations. Marcus was taking mental notes, but he could see the larger picture emerging. You're talking about fundamental culture change, aren't you? Exactly, Captain Worthington confirmed. You can't just adjust policies and procedures. You have to change how people think about the organization's purpose and their role within it. Marcus realized the magnitude of what he was contemplating. This isn't going to be popular with my shareholders or my senior management team. Change never is, Sarah observed. The question is whether you believe it's worth doing anyway. Marcus thought about the memorial ceremony he had witnessed, the dignity of the veterans he was meeting, the profound sense of purpose that seemed to guide their lives even after significant sacrifice and loss. I think, Marcus said slowly, that I've spent enough time building things that only matter to me. I want to build something that matters to other people. Captain Worthington studied him intently. That's a worthy goal, Mr. Sullivan. But you should understand that once you start down this path, there's no going back to your old way of thinking. Service changes you permanently. Marcus felt the weight of that truth. I think I've already changed more than I can undo. The question now is whether I have the courage to follow through. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Sergeant Major Rhodes said. It's action in spite of fear. The fact that you're worried about the difficulty of this transformation suggests you're taking it seriously. Marcus looked around at the 3 military personnel who had become his unlikely teachers. A wounded veteran rebuilding her life with quiet determination. A combat veteran who had maintained perfect composure while being insulted and had turned the encounter into a teaching moment. A career soldier who understood leadership as service rather than dominance. I want to ask you all a favor, Marcus said. I want you to help me design a different kind of company. Not just a more ethical version of what I already have, but something genuinely built around service and contribution. That's a significant request, Captain Worthington replied. What would you be willing to sacrifice to make that vision reality? Marcus considered the question carefully. Whatever it takes. My comfort, my wealth, my reputation, none of it matters if I'm not contributing something meaningful to the world. Sarah smiled. That sounds like the beginning of real leadership. The beginning, Sergeant Major Rhodes emphasized. The real test comes when you face opposition, when the new approach costs you money or opportunities, when people you respect tell you you're making a mistake. Marcus nodded, understanding that his education was just beginning. Then I suppose we'd better get started. Captain Worthington extended his hand. Welcome to service, Mr. Sullivan. I hope you're prepared for how much it's going to change your life. As Marcus shook the captain's hand, he realized that this moment represented more than just a business decision. It was a fundamental redefinition of who he wanted to be and what he wanted his legacy to represent. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something truly worthwhile. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the conference room of Sullivan International's London headquarters, but the atmosphere was completely different from the corporate environments of his past. The room was filled with employees at every level of the organization, from recent hires to senior management, and the energy was one of genuine collaboration rather than top-down command. Before we review this quarter's results, Marcus began, addressing the assembled group, I want to talk about what we've accomplished that can't be measured in profit margins. The transformation hadn't been easy. In the months following his encounter with Captain Worthington, Marcus had faced significant resistance from shareholders, board members, and senior executives who questioned his new approach to business. Several major investors had pulled out when he announced his intention to restructure the company around principles of service and employee development. Sarah, Marcus said, turning to Sarah Mitchell, who now served as the company's Director of Veteran Affairs, could you update us on the transition support program? Sarah, walking confidently with her prosthetic leg, approached the presentation screen. This quarter, we successfully placed 47 transitioning veterans in positions throughout the company. More importantly, our mentorship program has achieved a 96% retention rate, and we're seeing these new hires advance into leadership roles at twice the rate of our traditional hiring programs. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Marcus remembered his old board meetings, where success was measured solely in financial metrics and employee satisfaction was considered irrelevant as long as productivity remained high. James, Marcus continued, addressing a young man in his 20s who had been promoted from a construction site to the management training program, tell us about the Community Development Initiative. James stood up, clearly nervous but determined. 2 years ago, he would never have been invited to a senior leadership meeting, much less asked to present to the CEO, Mr. Sullivan. Our teams have completed 6 affordable housing projects in underserved communities. We've provided homes for 312 families, and more importantly, we've trained over 100 local residents in construction trades, giving them skills they can use for permanent employment. Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction that was completely different from the thrill he used to get from closing profitable deals. And the financial impact? The projects operated at a loss of approximately $2 million, James admitted, but the community impact assessment shows long-term economic benefits that far exceed our investment. Plus, the program has improved our recruitment and retention rates significantly. This was where the old Marcus would have exploded. A $2 million loss would have been seen as catastrophic failure, grounds for immediate termination and program cancellation. But Marcus had learned to measure success differently. James, I want you to expand that program, Marcus announced. I'm approving funding for 12 additional community projects next year. The room erupted in surprised applause. Marcus looked around at faces that showed genuine enthusiasm and pride in their work, something he had never seen in his old corporate environment. Captain Worthington, who now consulted regularly with the company on leadership development, stood up from the back of the room. Mr. Sullivan, perhaps you could share some thoughts on how this transformation has affected your perspective on business success. Marcus paused, considering how to articulate the profound change in his worldview. 2 years ago, I measured my worth and the company's value exclusively through financial metrics. I thought that profit was the only meaningful indicator of success and that everything else was secondary. He looked around the room at employees who had become collaborators rather than subordinates. I was wrong about almost everything. Yes, we need to be financially sustainable. And yes, we need to provide returns to our investors. But I've learned that those things are byproducts of serving a larger purpose, not ends in themselves. Marcus walked to the window overlooking a construction site where one of their community development projects was taking shape. When I look at that site, I don't see profit margins or quarterly targets. I see families who will have homes, workers who are learning valuable skills, and a community that's becoming stronger because of our contribution. Sir? Asked Elena Rodriguez, a project manager who had been with the company for 8 years, how do you respond to critics who say that your approach is naive or unsustainable? It was a fair question and one Marcus had faced repeatedly. Several business publications had criticized his transformation, suggesting that his new approach would lead to financial ruin and competitive disadvantage. Elena, that criticism comes from the same mindset I used to have, Marcus replied. The belief that service and profit are mutually exclusive, that investing in people and communities is wasteful rather than strategic. Captain Worthington stepped forward. Mr. Sullivan, perhaps you could share some concrete results that address those concerns. Marcus turned to the financial charts displayed on the conference room screens. Our revenue growth has actually accelerated since we implemented these changes. Our employee turnover has dropped to less than 5%, saving us millions in recruitment and training costs. Customer satisfaction scores have improved dramatically, leading to more repeat business and referrals. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. Most importantly, we've attracted top talent from around the world who want to work for an organization with meaningful purpose. Our competitive advantage now comes not from cutting costs or maximizing short-term profits, but from having the most dedicated and capable workforce in our industry. Sergeant Major Rhodes, who had joined the company as Director of Leadership Development, added his perspective. The transformation hasn't made the company less competitive. It's made you competitive in different ways that are more sustainable and more valuable over the long term. Marcus nodded. David's right. When your employees are genuinely invested in the organization's mission, when they believe their work contributes to something meaningful, their performance reaches levels that you can't achieve through traditional management methods. A hand went up in the back of the room. Marcus recognized Jennifer Walsh, a senior accountant who had been skeptical of the changes from the beginning. Mr. Sullivan, I have to ask, don't you ever miss the simplicity of the old approach, when success was just about hitting financial targets? The question struck at something Marcus had been reflecting on frequently. Jennifer, I understand the appeal of simple metrics. Numbers are clean, measurable, and seemingly objective, but I've learned that focusing exclusively on financial results is actually more complicated and stressful than focusing on service. Marcus thought back to his old life. The constant pressure, the sleepless nights worrying about market share and profit margins, the adversarial relationships with employees and competitors. When your only goal is maximizing profit, you're constantly fighting against other people's interests. Your employees want higher wages, your customers want lower prices, your suppliers want better terms. Everyone becomes an obstacle to your success. But when your goal is service, he continued, everyone becomes a partner in achieving something meaningful. Your employees want to contribute to the mission. Your customers become advocates for your work. Your suppliers want to help you succeed because they believe in what you're doing. Sarah Mitchell added, I think what Mr. Sullivan is describing is the difference between transactional relationships and transformational relationships. When you're only focused on profit, every interaction is about extracting maximum value. When you're focused on service, every interaction is about creating mutual benefit. Marcus felt grateful for Sarah's insight. Her perspective had been crucial in helping him understand the difference between using people and developing people. Sarah's exactly right. The old approach required me to see other people as competitors or resources to be exploited. The new approach allows me to see them as partners in creating something valuable. Captain Worthington stepped forward again. Mr. Sullivan, I think the group would benefit from hearing about some of the specific challenges you faced during this transformation. Marcus appreciated the captain's ability to push him toward deeper reflection. The biggest challenge was learning to make decisions based on long-term benefit rather than immediate results. When we started the veteran hiring program, it required significant upfront investment in training and adaptation. Short-term, it looked like a cost center. Long-term, it became one of our greatest competitive advantages. He walked over to a display showing employee satisfaction surveys. Another major challenge was learning to trust people. My old management style was based on the assumption that employees would do the minimum required unless constantly monitored and incentivized. I had to learn that when people believe in what they're doing, they'll often exceed expectations without external pressure. James raised his hand. Mr. Sullivan, what advice would you give to other business leaders who might want to make similar changes? Marcus considered the question carefully. Start by examining your fundamental assumptions about what motivates people and what creates value. Most business leaders operate from a scarcity mindset, the belief that success requires taking value away from others. Service requires an abundance mindset, the belief that success comes from creating value for others. Practically speaking, Sergeant Major Rhodes added, start with small pilot programs that demonstrate new approaches. Don't try to transform everything at once. Build evidence that service-oriented practices actually produce better results. Elena Rodriguez spoke up again. Mr. Sullivan, how do you maintain this approach when you face serious competitive pressure or economic downturns? The question touched on something Marcus had worried about during the recent economic uncertainty. Elena, that's when these principles matter most. When times are difficult, companies with purely transactional cultures typically respond by cutting costs and reducing investment in people. Companies with service cultures respond by deepening their commitment to stakeholders and finding innovative ways to create value. Marcus pulled up a chart showing the company's performance during the recent economic slowdown. During the market downturn last year, instead of laying off employees, we retrained them for emerging opportunities. Instead of cutting community programs, we expanded them to address increased need. The result was that we emerged from the downturn stronger than our competitors, Captain Worthington observed.